Welcome everyone. This is Desi Vijay. I'm a North-South National Team member and a coordinator for webinars. Glad to see you all here today. Wish you all a happy new year. We are opening up our registrations for the next regional contest soon, or already done. And just like previous years, we are planning to bring in a few of our past winners and various subject matters to talk to you, the youngsters, about their experience and provide some tips and also answer their questions. We call this Meet the Pro type webinar session. We are starting off with our popular subject spelling today. Thank you for your support and being here today with us. We have a number of pros with us who are eager to meet with you all, share their thoughts, and then answer your questions. Hence, without further ado, I would like to go on with the show. We have also a number of webinars, past webinars uploaded into our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the North South YouTube channel and enjoy the past webinars too. And finally, our regional contest registrations have started, and we also will be sharing very high level info here, but please do visit North-South website for more information and go ahead and register for the contests of your interest. Thank you for listening, and let's move on with the scheduled program. As you can see, we have 4 outstanding pros are here to talk to you about spelling and also make a small presentation. I'll introduce them one by one and request them to make their presentations. We will get to the Q&A after the presentations are all over, but however, you please keep posting the questions right now so that we can get to it once we are ready. I'm going to invite first Navneeth Murali. Navneeth is a 2-time championship finalist at the Scripps Award National Spelling Bee. He was placed 5th and 11th in 2018 and 19. He won 2019 South Asian Spelling Bee and 2019 North-South Senior Spelling Bee and 2018 Intermediate Spelling Bee and also 2019 North America Spelling Championship. He is continuing his passions for words and languages. He enjoys his knowledge with the next generation of spellers. He has worked with several spellers who have placed him well at Scripps and other major bees. He is also a lead vocabulary coach for North-South Foundation. Navneeth is interested in neuroscience and public policy and wants to pursue a career in medicine. He is planning to share his insights on identifying exceptions and making purposeful list from the dictionary. Please listen to him closely. And of course, he is also going to talk to you about general information of the contest. So that's what he will begin with.
Yeah, thank you, Uncle, for the introduction. Happy to be here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to talk about, first of all, how the contest. Oh, can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna start off by talking about how the contest itself is formatted. So at the regional and the national levels, there are 2 phases, at least 2 phases. The first phase is written. At the regional level, it's an online test with 25 words, out of which 10 are from an NSF provided word list that's generally 1,000 words long. And the second phase, which is the oral phase, that is 6 words, all of which are from NSF's provided word list. At the national level, there's also a phase 1 written test. That's 30 words, out of which 10 are from the word list. 20 of them can be from anywhere within Merriam-Webster's unabridged. And the oral phase is 3 words, all of which are from the NSF list. And at the national level, the main thing that distinguishes it from the regionals is the presence of a phase 3 competition, which is an oral elimination round. And at phase 3, all words from Merriam-Webster unabridged are fair game. And phases 1 and 2 are a little bit different in that all contestants advance to phase 2. So everyone participating at an NSF contest will be taking both the written and the oral components. And at nationals, the top 15 or so who advance from phases 1 and 2 make it on to phase 3. Next slide, please, Uncle. So the information you're allowed to ask in the oral phases of the competition are for the word to be repronounced You can also ask for alternate pronunciations if they exist. You can ask for the definition, and they'll give you the definition that's provided, but not other alternate definitions that are present in the dictionary. They'll answer questions about the language of origin, part of speech, and they'll give you the word in the sentence. Note, however, that no information is provided without you asking for that information. Sometimes if the word is a homonym, that will be listed or mentioned in the competition. But even then, that is just a cue for you to ask for more information. And no information will be answered or given to you unprompted. Also note that once you start spelling a word, you can't, you're not allowed to change the order of the letters that you're spelling. However, you are allowed to retrace whatever you've said. That's just a general rule that you see in mainstream spelling bees.
Yeah. And we strongly encourage that you go to the website and read out the entire rules and for the contest. And then if you have familiarize yourself with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so let's go ahead with what Navneeth is planning to talk to us today.
So before Navneeth, you begin, let me take a moment,
Sure.
if you guys don't mind. For those of you in attendance, I'm Christian Gowrie. I'm the Chief Academic Officer, working with all these, pros or our stellar champions. We want to bring tips, tricks, strategies to build your skills. Even though contest is the focus and what Navneeth covered are the rules, by attending these sessions, you should be gaining a lot of skills that will be generally useful for other competitions or for even academic growth. So what we are launching this year is something called a learning journey, as opposed to being focused strictly on competitions. Because some of the younger kids get scared of competitions, and then the questions may be a little bit harder. So the learning journey pathway is one of where we will have 8 to 10 weeks of coaching sessions that are accompanied by short test or quizzes, so that you get an exposure to the content and the level of knowledge required in the competitions, as well as testing strategies, so you don't get intimidated, because most of the times we have seen first-time contestants, particularly those who are in the grades 1 to 3, and even those in the 4th to 8th, if they're appearing for the first time, there could be a lot of things new. So please follow along and look for announcements on learning journey pathways that will really help you practice and then have good results and learn something new. So rather than winning, we want to stay focused on acquiring new skills and learning outcomes. With that, I'm going to let you, Navneeth, and Sahana, Harini, and Avani all cover your expertise. And thank you for joining and sharing your knowledge and experiences. Thank you. Thanks, Daisy.
Thank you, Krishnan. It's more apt because we have more than half of them are new parents and new kids. So please listen to them carefully. And then, like Krishnan said, the object is to learn, not just win the competitions. Here you go, Navneeth.
So I'll be sharing my insights on what exception lists are, when to make them, how to make them, and the best ways to sort of refine them to get the most efficient list possible. So I'm going to start off by quickly mentioning that the best way to start off with them is getting the best resource, which is Merriam-Webster Unabridged. That is the official source of NSF Spelling Bee as well as Scripps. So it is definitely a worthwhile investment that you should make. This is a screenshot of the main page that you'll get.
Sorry, I went ahead. Yeah, okay.
Yep, this is a screenshot of the main page that you'll get from Merriam-Webster Unabridged. Most of the times, I mean, the obvious searches you'd make would just be searching the word up, but there are a lot more options that you have that give you more leeway with the dictionary that allow you to make more efficient searches and lists. So I'll talk about them more as I first talk about what exception lists are and why they're important. Next slide, please, Uncle. So starting off from the fundamentals, a lot of you guys probably know about what roots are. They're the fundamental building blocks of words. However, even once you identify the correct root, the correct origin, and other key parts that can help you get the correct spelling of the word, there's one major hurdle, that is many roots have more than one possible spelling. So even if you're able to identify that, for example, a word comes from the Greek paleo, meaning old, the correct spelling isn't necessarily guaranteed because there's more than one way of spelling that root. So sometimes there are rules for distinguishing between the different forms of roots. And in that case, that's obviously optimal. So less words are exceptions to that rule, and that makes things easier. However, if there is no systematic way to distinguish between different spellings of roots, it's recommended that you make exception lists. Generally, in spelling, it's rote memorization, which is basically just mindlessly memorizing lists of words. That's frowned upon, but sometimes it is necessary. So exception lists are very effective and short. They're short and effective tools, basically, that can help you have a more targeted and systematic way of memorizing lists of words. So you can leave the rest of it to more logical and more root-based, more language-based ways of finding out how to spell words. Next slide, please. So it is possible to make exception lists from other Merriam-Webster sources, like, for example, the Third International Dictionary, the old source for Scripps. However, unabridged still remains the most convenient way to make these lists. The traditional way to make exception lists or just lists in general would be using wildcard operators. So basically, if you want to make a search, but you're leaving multiple letters as variables, so to speak, you'd use an asterisk. So for example, you'd make a list of words beginning with PALAE, and you'd add an asterisk at the end to get a list of words beginning with that. If you want to find a list of words containing RYNCH, which is the exception form of the Greek root for the word beak, you do asterisk RYNCH asterisk. So that would give you all words that contain the RYNCH letter combination, either in the beginning, middle, or ends of words. So that is very convenient for making lists. Also, there's another wildcard operator that exists. I haven't really used it much, nor do I see the need to use it that often. It is the question mark if you're unaware of a single word. The only cases that I can think of where that would be helpful would be outside the realm of exception lists. For example, if you know that if you know that you've seen a 5-letter word, maybe 4 of the letters in it or 3 of the letters in it, but if you search it up and it's not showing up in the suggested list, in unabridged, you might use that in order to narrow down the list of words or the word that you're trying to find, but it's not too helpful for exception lists. So that brings us to advanced search, which is the primary way of conducting making these searches for exception lists. Next slide, please. Advanced search gives you a lot of breadth, sort of, in terms of the list that you're making. You can do single category searches using a bunch of criteria. So under the etymology criterion, for example, you can put in either roots, languages that come from, or the languages that the roots are associated with, or the definitions of roots. So using just the etymology criterion, you can hypothetically find the Greek root for berry if you just search up etymology includes berry, and if you do a little bit of preliminary digging through, you can find that. You can find words from certain origins. For example, if you want to find a list of words from Maori, you can put that into advanced search. You can make that list, or also just a list of words containing a specific root. So that is one of the more useful searches you can make using advanced search. And there's also the subject option. I personally haven't used it that much because it doesn't filter easier words, but you can make thematic lists using the subject criterion. For example, you can identify all words that have to do with baseball, or all words that have to do with geology, or any subject, basically. You can search words up by date to identify new words added to the dictionary. However, a lot of these new words are commercially available online. You can search words up by part of speech, but I've never really done that because it's, in my opinion, too crude of a criterion. Making a list of nouns isn't going to help you, or just nouns. You can make lists by definition. So if you know a specific, if you want all the words that have, for example, the Devonian era in the definition, you can identify that. And you can make a lot of those sub searches through including keywords in the definition. However, you can't search by labels that are given in the definition. For example, if the word is regionally labeled as a word chiefly used in Ireland or Scotland, those things don't show up in the definition search. So that is unfortunately one limitation of the definition criterion. Could you go back to the previous slide, Uncle?
Oh, sorry. The previous one.
Mm-hmm.
Am I in the right one? Sorry. Oh, no. This one?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the last search, probably the one that you'd use the most, is the main entry search. So you can just use the wildcard operators and narrow down lists of words with specific letter combinations or just words in general. So what I used most often was a combination of main entry and etymology. So words with certain spelling combinations that came from certain languages. So for example, if I wanted to refine my list of words containing RYNCH in the middle, I might do asterisk RYNCH asterisk, and etymology includes Greek, or etymology includes New Latin to narrow down my list, and that is something that's helpful. Next slide, please, Uncle. So this is a screenshot of the advanced search page that you get. So you just put in whatever criteria, or you just put in whatever search that you want under the criteria as appropriate, and you'll get a list that's separated into pages on the dictionary that are generally 30 words per page, and you can filter out unnecessary words as needed, or make a more concise list, basically. Next slide, please, Uncle.
Oh, sorry.
So lists should be very short and easy to memorize, because the purpose of this is identifying words that don't follow the norm. So if you have a very long list that isn't very targeted, it's more words to memorize. You're less likely to have all of them on the top of your head.
Sorry to interrupt.
And
there is a request on the chat. They're asking to go a little bit slow.
Oh, okay.
okay, sure.
Thank you.
So again, lists should be shorter and easier to memorize, because the longer your list is, the less targeted it is, the more likely you are to forget some words from that list, since it's just so large. And that sort of defeats the purpose of it, because if you don't know all the words in the list, you're only aware of some of the exceptions to that. You never know if a word that you're getting on stage is part of the exception group or the mainstream spelling group. So you should always attempt to make exception lists as small as possible, so you're getting the most benefit out of them. So this is how I generally approach them, sort of a formulaic approach. So identify all the possible ways of spelling the word, and this you can do using advanced searches. Maybe an etymology includes search to identify all the words with that root, and then you find different ways it's spelled. Or something else you can do is just, this happens as you practice more, as you see more words, you're just aware of the different ways there are to spell a specific root. So generally there are 2 to 3 ways to spell a root that are mainstream. So identify all of them. So make all of those lists initially, or at least skim through the searches for all of them, and identify the most common way to spell the root. So most of the times, if you just put the search in on Merriam-Webster, it'll give you the number of entries. For example, X list has 61 words, another list has 30 words. Obviously, the first list has more words, so that's the mainstream way of spelling it. So eliminate that spelling and make lists of all the words containing all the other spellings. So for example, if you're looking at the form ending, the schwa before the form ending is sometimes confusing. For example, I form versus O form versus A form, etc. So I can, based off of the words I've seen, I know that I form is the most common way of spelling the, or of spelling the schwa before the form ending. So everything else would be considered, technically speaking, exceptions. So I would make lists of O form words, E form words, AE form words, words ending with Y form, basically all the other possible ways of spelling it. And I would create lists for all of them, and I would try to make those lists as short as possible. So I'd eliminate words that have phonetic pronunciations, so words where listening to the pronunciation would give you the spelling, where there's nothing confusing if you listen to the pronunciation properly. Words with variants. So the thing about this is generally if a word has more than one correct way of spelling it, people tend to get attached to one spelling over the other. That's a pretty normal thing. However, if a word has two spellings, one of which is an exception, the other of which is a mainstream way of spelling the root, stick with the mainstream way of spelling the root because it makes your exception list smaller. So eliminate words that are phonetic, eliminate variants, and also eliminate words with multiple forms. So if you have the adjective form of a certain word, the noun form of the same word, the verb form of the same word, and all three of them show up as entries in your exception list, and this is very common, just leave one form of the word, because if you learn multiple different forms of a word, you can, I mean, that is just more to add to your head when you can just learn the base form of the word. So ultimately, you can truncate exception lists to generally 15 to 20 words or less. A well-made exception list, I would say, has 20 or lesser words. There are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, you can have a relatively short exception list. And the shorter your lists are, again, the easier they are to memorize, and the more helpful they will be in the long run. Uncle, could you unshare your screen? I'd like to do a short run through.
Okay.
So 1 second.
You want to be presenter?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So can all of you guys see my screen?
Yeah, the Google. Okay.
Yeah. So the example that I wanted to do was the seal list. So the seal ending for words can either be spelled with C-O-E-L-E, C-E-L-E, or C-O-E-L. So that is generally a topic of confusion for a lot of spellers. So this is just hypotheticals. What I would do is make lists of all of them to see how large they are. C-O-E-L-E, 31 words. C-E-L-E, 39 words. C-O-E-L, 26 words. So just looking at it off the top of my head, I can see that C-O-E-L seems to be the shortest. Now there's one thing that I'd like to add before this. There is a rule for distinguishing between these spellings sort of crudely. So C-E-L-E and C-O-E-L technically mean different things. If you look at the C-E-L-E ending, you'd see that it means tumor or hernia. Another key word you generally see in definitions of words is filled cavity. So there are certain keywords that you would see that would tell you when a word is C-E-L-E. So now that we have that established, you can ask whether it comes from the Greek root seal, meaning tumor or hernia, and the answer to that question will determine what your spelling is. Or if you're at a B where they don't answer root questions, you can see in the definition that it would either talk about a tumor or a hernia or something of that sort. So you have a way of distinguishing CELE words from the other two combinations. So what I would do is I'd remove that from the equation completely. So next, you have two combinations left. You have COEL and COELE. So COEL seem to have less words. Again, I'll just run through the words. COELE, again, 31 entries. COEL has 26 entries. So if you're just doing a cursory skim through these words, you'll see that a lot of words, just follow my cursor here, you'll see that a lot of words have variants. Even if you click words that seem to have COEL as the main entry, there are variants. So ultimately, the list is much smaller than it looks like. Since I'd made this list, I mean, when I was a speller, I remember the words that are exceptions here. So you have ACL. ACL has no variants. That word you'd add to your exception list. 1 second. Is my screen still visible?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, flashed out for a second. So ACL is one of the exceptions. And then diaceal is another one of the exceptions. It has no variant. Scrolling through the words, that mixes. Oh, 1 second. Sorry. Yeah, mixoceal is another one of these exceptions. Has no variant. Optoceal is another one of these exceptions. It does not have a variant. And spongoceal is another word that does not have any variants. So everything else, just looking at a couple of examples, you'll see it has a variant. So since these words have variants, even if you were initially more comfortable with the COEL spelling for these words, remove them, because COEL is the exception list you're making. You want to make it as small as possible. So the more words you delegate as COELE words, the better. So ultimately, you only have ACL, diaceal, mixoceal, optoceal, spongoceal, 5 words out of these 26 that are actual exceptions. So that is what I would consider a well-made exception list. Even though you have a lot of words that you may see on your screen, being able to sift through those words, identifying which words are the words that you're likely to miss, or the words that actually cause confusion, and consolidating those words. That is sort of the way to go when it comes to exception lists. So again, the main takeaway is identify different ways of spelling a root, identify which of those are exceptions, make those lists, truncate them to the maximum degree that you can, and then memorize them. That is the path to success when it comes to exception lists. And with that, I think I'd like to conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Navneeth. It's really a lot of stuff you talked. And those who didn't catch everything, please, you can, we are going to send you the presentation material tomorrow, along with the link for the webinar. And so you can go through the webinar all over again in your own pace, and then try to get whatever he's talking about in a more detailed manner.
And if any of you in the audience have any questions, either about specific content I covered in my presentation or just in general, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Navneeth, and it was really good. Next, I'm going to invite Avani Joshi. She has competed in Scripps National Spelling Bee twice, in 2019 and 2021, where she finished as a finalist, tying for 7th place. And she feels that North-South played a pivotal role in her developing foundation as a speller, giving her a platform to practice before the spelling Scripps competition. She also competed in North-South regional spelling bees in 20 and 21. And currently she's running a spelling bee club to help provide other students in her locale to an opportunity to hone their skills and achieve their dreams in spelling. All the proceeds she collects always goes to the local charities. Welcome, Avani. Thank you for being here. She wants to talk about Hindi and Sanskrit words. She will explain what she's trying to say. So, do you want me to continue projecting?
Yes.
Okay.
You can move on to the next slide. We'll start there. Yeah. Okay, we are going to talk about Hindi and Sanskrit words. So just to give you a feel of what Sanskrit sounds like, I'm going to do an intro in Sanskrit, and I'm going to translate for you. So Namo Namaha, everyone. I'll just say Namo Namaha. Mam Nam Avani Joshi Asti. Aham Dasham Kakshayam Patami. Adya aham Sanskrit bhashayaha mahatvam vishaye vicharan prakatayami. I'm sorry if my pronunciation's a little off. I'm a Sanskrit learner in process, so this is it might not be 100% accurate, but the translation of this is Namaste everyone. My name is Avani Joshi. I'm in 10th grade, and today we'll discuss some important facets of the Sanskrit language, and Hindi derives from Sanskrit, so we'll talk about that all together. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, I just put a tree because, I feel like that's the best analogy for, languages. They all have different branches. So Sanskrit and Hindi both derive from the Indo-European branch, and Sanskrit specifically is one of the official languages of India. Sanskrit is touted for its usability in computer science and programming because of its complex, rigid structure. Sanskrit derives from Hindu sacred texts like the Vedas and Upanishads. Hindi derives from Sanskrit, which is the main point. Hindi, although derives from Sanskrit, but it has external influences from languages like English and Persian, Arabic. Sanskrit overall, in general, has imbued many other languages with its colorful words, the main example being English, which we'll explore in this presentation. And Sanskrit overall is known as the mother of all languages. The main reason for, Sanskrit spreading all across the globe is because of specific historical processes like Portuguese trade in India. They established port cities they established a port city in Goa, and British colonization all led to this diffusion of languages. Next slide, please. In this slide, we'll discuss the far outreach of the language Sanskrit, even in seemingly common words like orange. So the graphic on the screen should show you like a path the word takes across the globe as it transforms from Sanskrit to eventually the English word orange. So we'll outline the elementary or intermediate steps of the word, and we'll generalize the historical processes taken in order to produce the final word, which is orange. So the word on top of the graphic, linguistic Darwinism, it's kind of a juxtaposition of like scientific principles and linguistics. It's overall, in general, the evolvement of words over time, which is influenced by, different cultures coming together and interacting. So let's start talking about orange. The word orange traces its origin from Sanskrit word naranga. Persian emperors later gained interest in orange trees and planted them bountifully in their gardens. Arabian merchants brought orange trees along trade routes like the Indian Ocean trade route and the Silk Road to the regions in the Mediterranean and the Iberian Peninsula. And this is the most prevalent region that experienced this, language trade was Al-Andalus, the region Al-Andalus, which was Spain under Umayyad Muslim rule. So after Narang, which is at the very bottom left, we go to Persian. And they changed the spelling a little bit. They omitted the A at the end. Then it goes to Arabic, where they, instead of the G, they added a J. Then we go to a language called Occitan, which is aka Provençal. So they changed the spelling from N at the beginning to AU. Eventually, it finds its way to Middle English or Anglo-French, and its final spelling ORANGE. So this slide was basically to show you how language evolves over time and how Sanskrit has had a far outreach in the world. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll talk about Anglicization. Anglicization sounds fancy, but it's an interesting concept when you dive deeper. So Anglicization occurred due to historical processes like British colonization, which led to linguistic diffusion and the mixing of Hindi, Sanskrit, and English. So our first example of Anglicization on the screen, on the slide, is bungalow. The word bungalow comes from the Hindi word bangla, which means low thatched house, according to Merriam-Webster. Hindi's bangla referred to the European-style houses in the state of Bengal. So over time, the word bungalow evolved into its current spelling to simplify it, increase ease of pronunciation, and perhaps to make the word similar to other words of the English language. As for Gymkhana comes from the Hindustani. Hindustani is a mix of Hindi and Urdu language. Gained Khana, which is below Hindi. On the slide, it's below. It says Hindustani Gained Khana, which literally means ball house. Gained means ball, and Khana means house. And its evolved meaning, the meaning of Gymkhana over time has changed to be a meet featuring sports contests or athletic skills. So as the word gained Khana spread to the English language, as aforementioned by British colonization, when they mingled with the Indian people, they adopted their words and changed them accordingly. So the gained, in the word gained Khana, changed to gym in reference to gymnasium. And this overall is a representation of a blend of Western and Eastern cultures in a single word. Next slide, please. Yeah, there you go. Okay, now we're going to discuss some general language patterns of Sanskrit and Hindi that apply to both. It's a very crude generalization. I'm not going really in depth into it because I'm trying to find certain similarities that are in both that I can generalize with. So Sanskrit and Hindi overall tend to be phonetic and straightforward words. However, we must exert some caution in generalizing because exceptions exist, definitely. In this case, you as the speller may want to structure your studying of Hindi Sanskrit words based on the tips for exception word lists presented by Navneeth. Okay, so it is common for Hindi Sanskrit words, going to the second tip, to be paired, to see consonants like B and D paired with the consonant H, as in B and the. I haven't included K and T. You might see KH as in Kana or TH as in Tana. You might see those two. But I feel like B and H also, B and D are also seen in Sanskrit, and that's why I included B and D on the slide. So let me explain what labial means. Labial means the sound you make with your lips, like ba. You use your lips to make the sound. With DH, it's a little different. You kind of use your tongue hitting onto your teeth. Sorry, it's a crude explanation, but it's a sound you make with your teeth, like the, ba and the. Some examples of these pairings, these consonant pairings are bhutatata, and it means a type of philosophy in Buddhism. And daman, that's a proper pronunciation according to Merriam-Webster, uses the DH at the beginning, but it could be tricky to figure out where to put the H because they don't say daman. Merriam-Webster in the diacritical say daman. So based on that, you'll have to make special lists for each of these patterns to explore the exceptions, as I said, special lists. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, next slide. So if you pay close attention to the endings of Sanskrit Hindi words, you may notice that many words actually end in a vowel, like A, I, and U, which is great, honestly, because there's very little chance for error, but as I said, we can't generalize too much because exceptions do exist. This is the reason for the A, I, and U endings is because Sanskrit has certain guidelines for endings of words known as akarant. Akarant means the A sound at the end. Ikarant means I sound at the end. And ukarant, which means U sound at the end. And you could literally hear the sound in each of the words. Akarant, A, ikarant, I, and ukarant, U. So in general, if we move on to the second tip, our language pattern, the schwa sound is spelled with the letter A in Hindi Sanskrit words. So a recent example of this is asked in the finals of the 2022 Scripps Natural Spelling Bee, which honestly was the most exciting spelling bee in my personal opinion. So recently that I've seen, Ajivika. Oh no, I have to pronounce it properly. Ajivika. Ajivika is spelled Ajivika. Ajivika. So when you dissect the word, you see that Ajivaka, it kind of has, I'm stressing the schwa in the middle purposely. The A sound at the beginning, Ajivaka, is spelled with an the sound, the schwa sound is spelled with A at the beginning and end. But the issue is that the schwa sound in the middle is spelled with an I. So that doesn't follow the rule, and that's why it makes it a tricky word, especially if you haven't seen it. So let's see. It's a tricky word because the schwa is in the middle and it's spelled as an I. And to tackle such words, referring to making exception lists, referring to tips of making exception lists is most helpful. So that's mostly the trickiest part of Sanskrit and Hindi is the exceptions. But I can, for the most part, it is a simple language, relatively simple language in terms of spelling. We can move on to the next slide. Yeah, and these are my references. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope I could give you a general overview of the beauty of Sanskrit Hindi words and a glimpse into a small glimpse into both their complexity and relative simplicity in terms of spelling. And one final word I have to say about NSF. NSF definitely gave me a platform to succeed at the National Spelling Bee, and all of you attending this webinar, you guys are in the right hands. So they give you a great opportunity to pursue your dreams. And once again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Avani. It was really very interesting twist to that. Let's proceed with our next panelist, Pro Sahana Srikanth. This is what she told me. The spelling experience has been the most valuable of my life. I learned a variety of interesting concepts, made so many new friends, and gained important life skills that I have taken with me to the present day. She has been involved in Spelling Bee since 2017, and in 21 and 22, she represented in Scripps National Spelling Bee. She has really a passion for English language, the words, etymologies, and spelling in general. She is a part of a North-South Foundation spelling contest all her life, and she participated in many years and ultimately helped up to propel to the 2022 Scripps National Spelling Bee finalist. So she has been an avid speller and enthusiastic speller. She's a freshman at the high school right now, and though she is not eligible anymore to participate in Spelling Bee, she still volunteers as a coach for North-South Foundation. She hosts a bee program at her school and pronouns for local bees, regional contests. In addition to the language, she loves music and plays piano, violin, and dance Bharatanatyam. And she's also part of the school speech and debate team. Today, she wants to talk to you about The preparation for the Bs and how it changes as the years progress has been a significant in her life experience. Is your presentation here, Sahana, or you're going to do it?
It should be up on there. If not, I can do it.
Okay. No, let me see.
Okay, perfect.
So while that's coming up, I want to acknowledge and thank both Navneeth and Sahana. You have gone through the full cycle. You've gone through the competition, participation, doing excellent, and now giving back to the new generation that wants to aspire and become like successful as how you have been. Thank you both, and thank you all the panelists for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much once again to NSF. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and my experience with spelling has had a big influence because of NSF, and the local and regional contests have really helped me grow as a speller and individual, so thank you so much. And so today I want to talk to you guys about spelling preparation. And so a lot of the times we focus a lot on the technical aspects of spelling, which is very, very important to get that solid foundation down. But another aspect that is really important before you start laying down that coursework is to understand how you're going to be preparing for the rest of the B. And Uncle, you can go to the next slide. So as I've been involved in spelling since I was really young, one of the main things that I always focused on doing was kind of laying out a plan of what I wanted to achieve by the deadline or when the B would be. And this helped me make sure that I was making the most use of all my time and ensuring that I was able to get as much content as I was able to do. And this will help you be successful in future Bs, as you can know like what specific areas you need to grow from and what exactly you need to focus on for each level of competition. And so to begin, if you're a speller who's looking to prepare for national levels, I would highly, highly recommend having like a list or plan of what you want to achieve by nationals, because it'll help you, first of all, feel more accomplished at the time when nationals occurs, but it'll also help you have a specific schedule set down for here's what I need to have so-and-so done so that I'm able to stay on track and be prepared. And so this is kind of like the general strategies and tips that I would give for people who are looking to create a solid foundation and plan for that. So firstly, kind of determine the level of competition you're aiming for. And so each contest has a different difficulty level and list to study, and this obviously varies per what region you're in. So different regions might be more competitive and use more difficult words, and others might be easier. And so think about the B in your area and what level of competition you're aiming for next. So for example, for me, when I was a 6th grader, I was really intent on first winning my school B before focusing on regionals because it was extremely competitive that year. And so at that point, I wanted to completely lay a foundation of the school lists and words of the champions before I moved on to larger lists, like, for example, expanding on NSF or learning deep dives into rules. And so if you're kind of thinking about the level of competition, first start at smaller levels. So think, how am I going to be able to my school or qualifier before moving on to district, regional, or nationals? And this will help you make sure that you're learning that smaller content before you work hard for like larger levels, because obviously there are words that come from maybe a national subset that you could find in a school or qualifying B, and it's important to still focus on those smaller levels and not be too overconfident. And so kind of think about where your goals are and what words would form in that location. And if you are able to achieve acquire lists from a further level before that happens, I would highly recommend you go through that too. For me, sometimes my school provider would give me words of the champions before the school B even occurred, and I would make sure to learn that before progressing onwards, just because it helps you have that basis before you move on to off-list words. You can go to the next slide. And so understanding your content expands. And so the main focus of all spellers is to get as many words or roots as possible in that time period. And so for nationals, most of the Bs that happen at the regional level will usually end around March. So that gives you about 2 to 3 months of preparation for national centered. And so in that time period, you need to know what exactly you want to achieve content-wise, whether that is a certain list of roots, a full textbook, or subsets, for example, like the national subset. And so your priorities should be to choose the most expansive and relevant content. Obviously, no one would do this, but preparing like a school or regional level for nationals wouldn't be the most effective. So if you have access to things like textbooks, for example, words of champions as proposed by the Hathawar brothers, that would be really important to go through if that's something you're looking to do for nationals, and that will help you get a lot of words down by that time. And so some other things you could do in that time period are also looking through roots lists. And it's always important to have a foundation of roots and balance that out with your rote memorization of words as well. And in this section, it's also very important to know your personal learning strategies. Oftentimes spellers like to use things they've seen their coaches or other people do as well, but it's really important to know yourself and what works for you. So for me, my main learning strategy was taking notes, and that's how I felt like I could retain the most information. And I split my roots and words by having 2 different notebooks, and so I would take down all the roots I learned in a specific day by like physically writing them down and writing the meaning, and then continuously doing that until I would make sure to remember it. Other spellers used online writing softwares, so other spellers were able to just retain the information for reading, but make sure you know how it works for you so that you can save your time in the most effective manner. You can go to the next slide.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There's a request on the questions, just like for Navneeth, they want you to talk a little bit slower.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes. So for content expanse, this is a general like layout of an example plan that some people could put for preparing for a national level contest. So for example, if you were thinking of achieving maybe a regional level award for NSF, you could start by laying out a plan of maybe I want to learn the NSF 1000 word list and then the senior spelling bee strategies list from Latin, Greek, groupings, French, Portuguese, and then mastering words of the champions, for example, part 2 to 3. So if you are a speller looking to go through like a regional level, I would recommend that you go through these lists or techniques and kind of play that as your foundation, because it exposes you to a balance of words as well as roots and strategies. And so these languages are important to go through because they're very commonly found in these levels. And for words of the champions, you're going to see a high frequency of this at regional bees as well, especially parts 2 and 3. So if you have your school list down and have access to words of the champions, definitely include that in your sample plan. So personally, I had a like agenda of I think 10 to 15 different lists or books or different like root compilations that I wanted to explore by the time nationals came up. And every time I would run through one round of that, I would put a check mark next to it, and that helped me understand that I've done one circulation of this and can move on to the next one. So a lot of the senior spelling bee courses for fall have like recently ended around December, and so if you have access to that as a former senior speller, I would highly recommend implementing that in your circulation if you're looking to prepare for regional or national levels. And laying out this plan will help you understand what your goals are. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. Uncle, you can move to the next slide. So in addition to creating like a general sample plan for what content you want to go through, it's also important to make sure that you have the time commitment and have equally divided your work. So for me personally, I have a lot of other hobbies that I was invested in even during the time of my national preparation. And I know a lot of spellers are also invested in many different things like music, and even school can be a big time commitment sometimes. So it's really important to make sure you have that like balance personally. A lot of people don't really mention the amount of time commitment that spelling involves. And so by laying out kind of a week by week or day by day plan, you can kind of give yourself like a personal reassurance that this isn't something you have to stress too much about if you know that you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. So going back on that sample plan I just mentioned, if you were to kind of aim to have an NSF 1000 word list done in 2 weeks, which is feasible if you put the time commitment to it, what you could do is lay out a certain amount of words per day in addition to a certain amount of roots per day, and maybe a division of words of the champions if you have the time commitment. And balancing that out with things like your personal classes or homework will also help you know that you're able to get that done by the time period. And so as you can see on this list, I've included letters V and M. And so in addition to like reading or taking notes or kind of watching videos, if that's your strategy, it's really important to also get in verbal quizzing. And I'll talk on this a little bit more in the next few minutes, but getting that practice of spelling your word out loud is something that you cannot avoid, especially if you're looking at higher levels like regional or nationals. And what that will let you do is understand how to break down a word in the spot And it will also help you practice kind of getting that done in a certain amount of time, because nationals and regional contests don't let you go on for like 3 to 5 minutes. You have to spell your word in a certain time. And practicing doing that will give you more reassurance in the future. And doing all of this will only build your confidence and abilities as a speller as well. And then for that M section that I have over here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but that is a day that you could focus on missed words. And so in addition to going through a first revision of all the words that you study, you should make sure to go through missed words as well. And whether that's after verbal testing or testing yourself, making sure to revise the words that you aren't fully sure on will only make sure that you are confident that you can get those right in the future. And after going through one circulation, as you can see on the screen, there's like a division of 1,000 words before the verbal test. You should also make sure to do that one more time, because spelling knowledge is something that only grows with repetition. And so if you learn a word one time and don't visit it again, there's a high likelihood that you're going to forget it, and that defeats the purpose of going through it in the first place. So make sure to revise your words and circulate content, and divide it up in a way that you're sure will enhance your memory. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So this is just another sample schedule. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but if you are personally like have a preference for like laying down time limits, this is something that might help you. Obviously, this is just a layout and might not work for everybody, but keeping that in mind, it's something you could implement. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. Oh, Uncle, could you refresh the screen? Okay, perfect.
Let me get to the view.
Absolutely. And at any point, if you guys have questions or need me to go slower, please drop that in the chat.
Sahana, there is a question, and I want to pass it on right now because we may forget. They're asking what is V and M in the slide. So I'm not sure which slide they're referring to.
I'll go through that. So in that calendar that I put, it was just a sample template for the plan that was mentioned. And when I say V, it means verbal quizzing. And so a lot of spellers sometimes spend a lot of time doing their own personal reading and not practicing orally. And that is a really crucial skill to develop your public speaking and also confidence that you're able to spell a word in a specific time limit. So for me, after I finished one circulation of studying like a certain plan, for example, the NSF list, I would move on to asking like a parent or a friend to do a verbal circulation of that. And so I'd either ask them to do random quizzing, which is just like pick a random selection of 50 to 100 words to like, quiz me on and see what I can get right, or go through the entire list and see what my accuracy level is. And this is important after your circulations to understand what words you're able to retain and what words you're more likely to slip on. And after you run through that, you'll be able to see where your difficulties are and what trends you need to kind of specialize more time in resolving. And then M obviously is like missed words. And so after your verbal circulations, you'll probably have a set of words that you didn't get correct. And that's perfectly okay. Just making sure to revise that and go through it before your B's come up, so you know that if you have a word that you haven't gotten correctly, you'll be able to spell it right in the future. And so that ties in with what's on the screen. So it's really important to go through circulation and consistently circulating the missed words, dividing them up like 5 to 10 per day, even if that's something that would work for you, is better than just completely neglecting them. And never get overconfident with your spelling, because it's way better to revise something over and over until you're fully solid on it than to do it 50% and end up missing it at a B. And obviously, if you memorize the 1B school list for grades 3 to 4, you don't have to circulate that, but kind of knowing where your limits are. And with testing, I know a lot of spellers might not be able to have access to these, but if you are able, I'd recommend online platforms such as Word Club for like school level, or the NSF games, even Spell Pundit, if that's something you're interested in. It depends on your personal like abilities. So if you know you can retain words by doing online platforms, then go for it. And then doing practice Bs. And so for me, when I was preparing, I would do practice bees with my friends, and they would kind of be like the judge or pronouncer and like keep quizzing me on words, and that gave me the practice of like being in a bee setting. A lot of spellers are also switching from a virtual to in-person setting, and getting that in-person like facilitation is really important. Nerves are also a really big aspect of bee, which I'll also talk about. But on the terms of testing, coaching and conversations are also really good. If you have a coach, obviously run through words with them and do verbal practice with people like your friends and family. So yeah, next slide. So for memory, a lot of spelling is rote memorization, as mentioned by Navneeth, but to make sure that you're able to remember as much as you can, even with the rote techniques, here are some suggestions that I would have. So first of all, always think about what sticks out to you. So the more unique what you learn is, the more likely you're going to remember in the future. And so for a breakdown, when you're studying vocabulary and roots, two sections that I would definitely not neglect, make sure that you're taking account of like origins and derivations. So if you're really familiar with, for example, like Latin stems and Latin verbs, and you have a list of Romance languages, noting down their transformations will help you really understand, okay, why does this word look the way it does? Which will make sure that your spelling memory isn't rote and surface level, and it will also make sure that your spelling is accurate in the future. And if you like are able to note the trends between these transformations and group words based on their transformations too, that will help you kind of use that method and apply it to words in the future as well. And if you have words from places like Greek and Latin and they're a consolidation of roots, splitting them and breaking down these like kind of longer words will also really be beneficial for you as well. And on the comprehension side of it, understanding why you make mistakes is something I can't emphasize enough, because oftentimes we make a mistake and we understand like, okay, this is the real spelling, but what you also need to focus on is why the mistake happened. And so what went behind your process of formulating that word. And it'll really build your critical thinking skills and also help you be a better speller and a more confident person. And so, for example, a lot of spellers tend to remember their missed words more than they remember their correctly spelled words. And going through that consolidated list of here's the list of words I've missed in the past few years, and understanding here are the patterns that went wrong in each of those occurrences will help you prevent those mistakes in the future. And for me, I had a notebook.
I'm sorry again. Yeah. There's a different parent asking also for you to go slower. Yeah. So if you can slow down a little bit.
Okay, I'll go much. So once again, breakdown and comprehension. And so I had a small like notebook on just mistakes. And so this was not something that I used to like criticize myself. It was more of, here are a list of things that I've frequently noticed that I do incorrectly. And then you're able to target these tactics and prevent them at a national level. So in one of my regional bees when I was, I think, a 5th grader, I missed a word based on F or PH. And since then, I've always made it a crucial like component of my spelling to make sure that PH and F is something I always ask this pronouncer, like, is it from Greek or Latin, and what exactly goes behind there. And kind of grouping words based on your mistakes will just let you be more intuitive about your spelling, and revising those lists on the patterns is something you should implement into your study strategies as well. And next slide. Okay, so ways to learn is also something that I would like to emphasize today. And so a lot of spellers would use those techniques that I mentioned before, like online platforms and reading through lists, but you can also approach them from a more unique aspect. And so when I was like a younger speller, I kind of really found it interesting when I had epiphanies on words, and that really exposed me to the wonders of spelling. And when I learned about like, oh, this word is like that because of a certain reason, it exposed me to more concepts that delved me deeper into spelling. And so these are just a list of a few words that gave me like a little epiphany on spelling that you can also take into account if you ever have a similar experience. And so I used to get really confused on like Greek stems and roots when I was like really younger. And so when I learned that the oh, sorry, you can go to the next like slide. Yeah. So when I oh, sorry, like back to, yeah, that one's good. Sorry. When I learned about the word sophomore, I learned that it meant like smart moron, and I thought that was really funny because I had a lot of sophomore friends, and that kind of like stuck with me. And just like keeping on consolidating unique words that I learned. So for psephology, I thought that it meant the study of pebbles before I realized that they used pebbles in elections in ancient Athens. And that also was something that stuck with me. I used to have difficulties with French as well, and I learned the word semanier that was based off of the French seman, meaning weak. And then words like de gras, which is based on the grass meaning gras meaning fat, and then pierrotage based on pierre meaning rock. And then one of the more like notable ones that I probably will never forget is nritta, but in the dictionary it's pronounced enrita. And as a dancer, I found that kind of insulting that they had nritta pronounced enrita. But just those like lists of words that were completely random and just like gave me like a little shock were something I always consolidated. And trying to find out what your personal technique is for learning is also important. So for me, I can use like visual auditory techniques to learn, but kinesthetic was one of my main ones. So if I was noticing that I was like kind of getting mentally drained, I would draw out a word and definition instead of keeping on reading it just to make sure I would remember it. For visual learners, I'd recommend videos like Saturdays with Stuti, if you've heard of that. It exposes you to a lot of different languages. For auditory, listening to podcasts while you're like walking or kind of multitasking. And for kinesthetic learners, I would always recommend a notebook. And the most important thing with all of these is frequency. The more often you do it, the better you get at it. So next slide. Yeah, and so for pacing, spelling knowledge is definitely cumulative and it goes at a slower pace. And so even if you are doing like a set of 1,000 words in one day, it's really important you still circulate that in frequency because a lot of the times you'll forget the word. And so make sure that you're always grasping a certain subject or content before moving on. Bulking is really great for like learning a mass of words at a time, but the only way that'll be helpful for you in the future is if you make sure to revisit them. So always prioritize retaining the information and keeping that in like your head before bulking and forgetting, especially for future levels. And yeah, that's for pacing. Next one. And so in terms of prioritization, as I mentioned, for local lists, word comprehension for spelling and vocabulary should be more centralized on Words of the Champions or your school list. If they do go off list, I would recommend looking at like a My Spell It list if you have access to that, or even NSF 1000 list, just expanding your ability to go through basic lists of words. And then on the roots behalf, it's extensively important to get exposure to Latin, Greek, and Romance languages because you will see that in excess, especially at the regional and preliminary national level. So building your familiarity with those three subjects is important, and Romance languages encompass things like French, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish, and if you're familiar with Latin stems and verbs, that can take you really far. And then in terms of assorted lists, we often have like a personal set that we go through. So for me, I had like a few textbooks that I wanted to visit and some lists I found online that were important for me. And so if you have those, make sure to go through them and keep that in priority atop Latin, Greek, and languages. And then for deep dives, this was like a kind of historical thing that I liked personally, but going through a day where I would spend solely on one language that I was having difficulty with and getting a kind of confirmation for that language. Some scholars might find that interesting to go through the specifics of one language, but I would recommend that if you're kind of interested in the cultural aspect of words. Next slide.
Sahana, there is a question.
Yes.
They're asking the reference to the video. They're asking what video you were referring to.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat, but it's called Saturdays with Stuti, and it's mentioned in SSB as well. But that video site is really good for people who want to expose themselves to different languages because she goes through, I think, all the way from like Latin, Greek to even more rarer languages, and that's a really good way for visual learners to get the root-based knowledge. So if that's something you're interested in, I can put it in the chat soon, but that's what it's called.
I will post the link. Don't worry. Thank you.
Perfect. And so on a different like aspect of preparation, some important tips while you're in the B is like clearing your mind before orally spelling. But you're never allowed to go back and change your spelling and sequence. So even if you're thinking that your word is like wrong or that you have the wrong spelling, always have that layout and something that you're even partially confident in so that you know what you're saying before you say it physically. And then going through each individual sound and breaking it down according to language. So what is really important if you're familiar with things like Spanish, French, Italian, or Japanese is that each language has a specific way it looks and sounds and feels, and having that grasp from the language kind of only happens with repetition. So when you're in the bees moment and you hear like a word or sound from a specific language, being able to go through that specific sound and saying, oh, in Spanish, the schwa is more likely to be a than an e or something along those lines, that will really help you develop confidence in the spot. Next slide. Yeah, so for frequencies, a lot of different levels will have different frequencies of different languages. But in general, if you're looking at a smaller level, focus on mastery of Latin, Greek, and general spelling groupings. If you're at a more intermediate level, focus on developing Latin verb expansions into Romance languages, as well as Greek and medical terms. And if you are aiming for a higher level, also in addition to that, familiarize yourself with Asian languages, eponyms, which Harini will talk about, and then indigenous and unknown languages as well. And next slide. And so as Krishnan Uncle mentioned before, there is like a current focus from NSF's behalf on a learning journey, which is, as he mentioned, the focusing on learning and application or testing. And so you can move on to the next slide, Uncle. NSF is considering a week build-up or supplement to nationals course, which will most likely run around from March to May. And so the purpose of this course is kind of to build up on SSB content to prepare you for a more national level of spelling. And so each week would focus deeply on a different subset and do thorough investigations of common languages like Romance languages, but also more rare languages like Slavic and Indic languages. And we would go through specific patterns, expanding on exceptions and tools to deal with the schwa, as well as what to expect for each level of competition if you're trying to go for a national level and atop like uncategorized language divisions. So next slide, Uncle. And so why we wanted to bring this up at MTP is because we wanted to kind of get an idea of how many spellers would be interested in that, as well as what the interest level would be and what specific things spellers would find important to include in that. And so as mentioned here, the course goal is to prepare spellers for national spelling bees. And so if we did a proposed March to May session for Scripps nationals and a June to August session for NSF nationals, the purpose would be to build upon senior spelling bee content with these language patterns and provide a supplementary guidance to prospective national spellers. And so the content will be kind of provided outside of class as well, and it is expected to have a little bit of proficiency before joining. But I will send out a form in the chat later to see like what your guys' interest would be in that. Please do fill that out just so we can understand what specific things would be important to include if we do execute the course. And with that, I think I'll conclude my presentation, but I once again want to mention how grateful I am to NSF and Scripps for truly developing me as a person. And I've grown so much throughout the spelling journey, and it would not be possible without NSF and Scripps. So thank you so much.
Uncle, I'm unable to hear you.
Thank you. I was on mute. Thank you, Sahana. There are so much of stuff you put it in. And I want to mention that the reason these kids are talking so fast because I gave them a very limited time for their presentation. And they had packed so much within that time. They just, I don't know, they could have taken double the time, still they will not finish. But let's go on to the next part of the speaker. We have saved the best for the last, so be prepared. We have Harini. Harini is a current Scripps Award Spelling Bee champion. Harini Logan is had a spelling journey from 2016 after gaining inspiration by watching the 2015 National Spelling Bee Scripps National Spelling Bee Finals. She started her journey in 2018 when she was in the 4th grade and participated 4 consecutive National Spelling Bees, 2018, 19, 21, and 22, and became the national champion in 22. Throughout her journey, Harini is also participated in North-South Foundation Bees since 2016 and believes that they have helped her a lot in her method for spelling on stage. So welcome, Harini, and she wants to talk to you about eponyms. Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Uncle. Thank you for the introduction and best for last. Wow. Okay, my panelists have given some great presentations. Watching Navneeth's presentation made me feel like I was a student again. So yeah, so eponyms. So what are eponyms? Eponyms are a variety of things. They are words derived from people's names, and they usually tend to be named after, if the word is a thing in particular, like maybe it's a plant or a dessert, they tend to be named after the creator or discoverer of the word. And one example there is dobos, and that's a type of pastry, a Hungarian pastry, and it's named after the chef that created it. And there are many eponyms across the world, like people across the world who have been pioneers in their fields. And some examples of eponyms are genus and other taxonomic words, and adjectives describing the person or their achievements, like whether it's literary, scientific, etc. And there are many different eponyms across different fields. So if you can see here, there's some words that some names that you may recognize or know how to spell. For example, Daniel Cooper or Tiffany, they're all words that are names that we can recognize. But at the same time, there are words like, or names like Dobos or Abernethy, which we aren't exposed to as often. You can go to the next slide. Cool. Thank you. So why are they tricky? The tricky part about eponyms is that the name itself won't have a language of origin, but the place that the person is from. So this is an example of the word Ascom. That's the language of origin, like that is given in the dictionary. So you won't see like Greek or Italian unless the person is Italian. But in this case, this person is from England. So the place that they're from will be what's included in the origin, not the language they speak. So that can make it a bit tricky to spell eponyms. And sometimes there are other languages influencing the spelling of the word, for example, Greek and Latin, and I'll touch on this later in the presentation. And the name itself doesn't have any identifying rules or clues inherently included in the etymology that the judges are going to give you. So there will be some people from places like Italy or Germany where you can rely on Italian and German language patterns, but sometimes there'll be people from places like, for example, Nigeria, where you won't instantly be able to latch onto a language pattern. And this isn't on the slide, but whenever I was learning eponyms, I used to joke that only people with really like scarily spelled names would do enough to become famous and be put in the dictionary. So you will tend to see some very trickily spelled names within eponyms. You can move on to the next slide.
Sorry, went back.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So how can we spell names? So try to connect these words to names you've heard before. So this is something that is really important in spelling, and it's like mnemonic devices, which is basically just connecting something you already know to a word you maybe don't know so you can remember it better. So even if the word itself is completely unrelated to the name or the person that you're thinking of, still use it as a mnemonic. So for example, if y'all watched the 2021 National Spelling Bee, you would know that Zyla won on Maria, and she connected the word with Bill Murray, which was easier for her to remember the word. So that's definitely a great strategy to use no matter what type of word, even if it isn't an eponym, just related to words, names, things that you already know or have learned of. And sometimes you do know how to spell the names. Like maybe they're American, you've encountered them. An example I have here is Chandrasekhar. So especially for like Indian American kids, maybe you recognize the name, but don't overcomplicate names you think you know. So there are some names that are complex and they're not spelled exactly like they sound. But for example, Robertsonian comes from the name Robertson. So like even the word like Smithsonian, for example, if you think you know the name, and even if it's like an American, maybe the person or an English person, then just spell it the way you think you learned it. You can move on. So tips and tricks to spell eponyms. And these are mainly going to be for the eponyms that you can't immediately discern. So like Robertson, for example. These eponyms are going to be more of languages or places that you won't instantly recognize. So first of all, the first tip is, are there any suffixes or roots involved that might affect the spelling of the name? So there is, of course, the suffix ia, which means, and this is a really helpful suffix, definitely for all genus words, and ia means a genus of plants or animals. So in this example, the botanist Samuel Duty, the suffix ia changed the spelling to ia instead of ya. And there are ya genera, like we saw Maria, but in this particular case, since the word comes from the ia suffix, the spelling is changed. So be mindful of these suffixes that change the spelling, or even adjective suffix that change the ending of the word from the name from y to ian or ean, for example. And you should also be mindful of how these suffixes change the pronunciation of the name. So this French botanist, whenever the ia suffix is added to make it pronounce smoother for English speakers, which Avani touched on as anglicization, it becomes Gomansha. So you might not immediately associate that with a T, but the name has a T. But because of the suffix, the pronunciation is being changed. So be mindful of that. You can move on to the next slide. Number 2 is, are there any other languages involved that might affect the spelling of the name? So for example, at the top corner, there's Cartesian, but the name of the actual scientist and philosopher is pronounced Descartes. And because of it becoming Latinized, and so Sahana touched on Romance languages in her presentation, like Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, etc. And these languages are directly connected to Latin. So sometimes you'll see a Latinized version of a name. So again, Cartesius is the Latinized version of Descartes, and that has what's gone into English and influenced the adjective Cartesian. So if the word goes through another language, and here also New Latin is another language that this particular word has gone through. So how might that affect the spelling? And again, how might that affect the pronunciation? So the dictionary doesn't say this, but this is in the origin, but this is the English dictionary, of course. So the final language that these words go into is English. So think about how that impacts the pronunciation of the word. For example, this word Quixote was not always pronounced Quixote. And this comes actually from a Spanish literary name, Quixote. So you don't pronounce it like that in English because that's not how English speakers, that's not the diction that they use. So think about it. Even if the name doesn't immediately sound like a name that's coming from that particular language, like Quixote does not sound like a Spanish name. But by the time it comes to English, that's how the pronunciation is changed. So definitely it's important to note that. You can move on to the next slide. All right, so tip number 3 is, what place is the person from? And do you know what language they speak there? And this is probably by far one of the most important because, so for example, Switzerland has historic French influence. So a lot of Swiss cultural words like food tend to have French influence, and raclette is an example. That's a Swiss dish that's really popular, but that is French and has French rules. So an example of a Swiss eponym is Vaucheria, and Vaucheria comes from a Swiss botanist. And this actually follows, you can see 2 rules of French within the word. For example, AU making the O sound and CH making the sh sound. So Vaucheria is spelled with French language patterns. So if I was a speller getting this word and I was told that this came from a Swiss botanist and I can hear it pronounced Vaucheria, I can make the inference that I have to use French rules to, if I don't know the word, I can use French rules to guess the spelling. And you can move on to the next slide. So tip 4 would be educate yourself on what languages are spoken where, especially languages that aren't spoken where you think they are, or countries that don't speak the languages you think they may. So this can be as simple as learning that, for example, the primary language in Spain and Mexico is Spanish, Germany is German, France is French, and don't discount those because it's definitely important even if you get like an Italian artist that you're able to use Italian patterns, so that is important. But some examples of these countries are, the most popular probably is Portuguese in Brazil, and Portuguese in Angola is a less well known, and French in Niger, and Suriname, which is in South America, their official language is actually Dutch because of the Dutch influence. So if you educate yourself on these countries where you don't need to know every single language in every single country, just get a general gist of it, and especially these exception languages. So whenever, for example, if you get a Brazilian eponym, then you'll be able to apply Portuguese rules towards it. You can move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is where it gets a bit complicated. Acknowledge that sometimes the same place or country may have different languages spoken, and if you don't know the name or the word, try to guess using context clues within the pronunciation of the word. So in Switzerland, I mentioned previously about the French influence, but there's also a lot of German there. Like German is one of the primarily spoken languages as well. So when you hear the name, you can try to use clues from the pronunciation to try to discern whether it's spelled like using French patterns or German patterns. Like for example, Vaucheria, there were 2 French rules present in the pronunciation of the name, and it sounds like a French word. So you're able to guess that you should use French patterns towards that. But this word in particular, Opterhalben, it is from a Swiss chemist this time, but you can tell that this word is reliant on German patterns. For example, the Halden, the A, and the Op being AB, that's all German influence. So whenever you hear this word, it doesn't sound inherently French, rather it sounds like you would want to use German patterns. So it's important whenever you're, this is even general, like when you're given a country or a person from a certain country, you're not exactly sure what language they speak. And this doesn't work 100% of the time, but definitely listen to the pronunciation of the word and try to look for patterns in languages that you know, language patterns that you know within the pronunciation of the word, and combine that with knowledge of which country this person is from. And you can, most of the time, almost 100% of the time, use that to correctly spell the eponym. And yeah, thank you for listening. I hope that helped.
Thank you. Thank you, Harini. It was interesting. And thank you, everybody. It's actually a lot more than I expected. And it really, I know how busy you are with your school activity and extracurricular activities and other travel during the holiday time and everything, but you put in a lot of efforts, you put in a lot of interest in showing, and your enthusiasm shows when you're presenting it to the audience. So I'm really, really thankful. We are giving a new meaning to the Krishnan's initiative of learning journey. We are really, this can be used everywhere in your school, college or life, everywhere. We actually are exceeding our time because our pros are all really out to explain everything. But if you can stick around, we can get to some questions and then have them answer. Please stay back for some time. So let me, Narayana, do you have any questions?
Yeah. I answered a lot. I think there are only.
I know. Yeah. Right.
But I think the first question, I think this is for all the panelists. I know Avani left. Avani had some personal business to take care of, so she had to leave early. But we have Sahana, Harini, and Navneeth still with us. So the first question for all of you, actually, I'm not sure who would go first. Maybe Navneeth, you can go first because I think I've been asking for this for a long time from you, and it did not happen. So maybe it will happen this time. So I would like to get coaching from these people. Can you please share their email IDs or contacts? So unfortunately, from North South, we cannot. But we do have coaching classes that we do offer, and then all of them do coach for us. Harini coached vocabulary, Navneeth coached vocabulary for us, and Sahana is coaching spelling, and then she talked about what she'll be doing after this. So all those things will happen. And then once you get to their classes, then you get to know them, and then whatever happens after that, and it can happen, right? So that's the way I think. But then I want to pass that question to you. So there is a lot of interest in what you shared today. I think there's a lot of good things that are shared, and then it definitely stood out today as the top spelling people in the whole country. So, so now, do you want to take that question first, and then see? I mean, from North South we cannot share their emails or contacts, right? But anything else you guys want to add, please go ahead.
I mean, if it's about coaching in general, I'd suggest joining the North-South programs. They are the spelling program, I believe, has multiple levels. The vocab program. Currently, there is one level, but we have it split into age groups. So each of the sessions is targeted for specific audiences. So even if you are, you know, a young student that's trying to make to sort of get your feet wet in vocab, there is an option for you. And if you're also a little bit older and you want to get introductory help with vocab and sort of understand what it's like preparing for vocabulary and context with the Scripps B, we also have a program for you. And currently the vocab team is also working on a project that'll basically start offering more advanced vocab classes also for those who are interested, tentatively starting this summer.
Thanks, Navneeth. And one thing I want to make sure the parents understand, these young ladies here, they give a lot of time to North South. So when you're asking them, can I get with them, coach them, like that's what really they're doing for North South. You are just not seeing all the work they're putting into it, and it's just not one person, right? We are able to run these classes, we're able to raise money, and we're able to send that money to kids in India for their education, like getting engineering education, medical education. That's the whole thing, right? If you understand I'm not sure if we shared any of the North-South our mission or statement at the beginning, but that's really what we are trying to do, right? So that's the model we would like to follow. So when you think of any coaching class or anything, I would like to think about North-South first. But that's not to say, like, we do encourage them to branch out in different ways. So we'll give them full support in whatever they want to do. But I think I really recommend you signing up for, like, looking at our offerings and signing up for those. Harini, anything you want to add to that? Or if you have anything cooking and if you want to share, feel free. We won't get offended for sure. Okay.
No, I just want to add on to what Navneeth said for sure. The NSF program, I'm a vocab coach, and the materials and the way we go through different sections of vocab words for competition every week, I think it's definitely has been very helpful for my students. And our coaches are great. And yeah, just wanted to add that one.
Thank you. Sahana, anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently a senior spelling bee coach for spelling through NSF, and I really feel like it would be beneficial for any speller at all, just because not only do you get to interact with previous like NSF and Scripps finalists or semi-finalists, but you also get to meet a lot of other fellow spellers, and that's a really big important part of like the spelling journey. It's like bonding with other spellers, and through NSF you're able to connect in a group platform with other people who have the same goals as you, the same mindset as you, and have learned and had the same experience as you. And for me, when I went to Scripps for the first time, it was like an in-person experience. I got to engage with spellers, and with COVID and everything, I'd never been able to do that before, and I was so grateful to be able to meet them in person. But even having that ability to do that online is something that you will really find helpful in the future, and making friends through NSF. These are all experiences that are part of the spelling journey, and through NSF you're able to build on them. So with the spelling bee content NSF covers, it will help you not only with your spelling journey, but also building your public speaking and confidence. So I would highly recommend you get involved with that if you are able to. So, yeah.
Okay, we have only a few more, and I think Harini, I will give the next question to you, and then you can leave. Harini has a vocab class to teach. So, so next question is, what challenges have you faced during your school spelling bee, regional country spelling bee, and if you can offer them some study tips for the same.
My spelling journey was, I'd say, unique because a lot of previous Scripps champions have won at least one national title before they won, but I'm unfortunately not on that list. But I would say definitely don't let setbacks throw you back, I guess, because I came second a lot consistently in a lot of online bees before the nationals, and I would say it would have been really easy for me to be discouraged. And it's happened in the regional level too, and this applies to any level, not just national. Whether it's regional bees, school bees, definitely use not performing as well as you hoped you would as motivation to perform better the next time, and don't let it discourage you. And as for study tips, I would say probably just be consistent. You don't need to overload on yourself or study so much you feel like you're gonna pass out or something. Just be consistent. Just do a little bit every day, and definitely as you get closer to the bee, increase that little bit. But don't, and of course take breaks when you need to take breaks, and don't overload. But I would just say being consistent is the most important thing. And even if you're maybe on vacation, just do a little bit every day. You don't need to push yourself to be working 8 hours when you're on winter break or something, but take advantage of the time you have and be consistent.
Yeah, thank you, Harini, and feel free to leave whenever you need to. Thank you so much for joining. I know you're all busy. I have a few more questions for you, Sahana and Navneeth. The next question, well, I see somebody asked, okay, actually the parent left, but maybe it will help others. They're asking if they need any software or applications they need to use for practicing, and any suggestions you guys have for them. Navneeth, you can go first.
Sure. So in terms of
whatever helps them, please share. You don't need to hold back.
First of all, in terms of what NSF itself offers, for both spelling and vocabulary, NSF has a B team, so that gives mainly words from NSF's own database, and it gives words in very similar settings to what you would encounter at NSF contests. In terms of something foundational, that's certainly something that would help. In terms of other software, there are also a few things that are commercially available. Spell Pundit, Xco, etc., or some conventional software companies that offer things for spellers. If that's something you're into, you may want to check them out. But I mean, in terms of is it necessary? Technically, everything is possible with just the conventional sources. You don't need to necessarily type everything out in order to succeed. If it's something that works for you, certainly go for it. It again is very contingent on what works for you, your best learning style. So if typing words on software helps you out, certainly that's something that you should do. If making your own databases, making your own lists, splitting words, that works for you, you can stick with that along with making targeted lists. So it's hard to say, or hard to generalize rather, but certainly software can help.
Sahana, you have anything else to add to that? I think that's a good question. So I want to see your perspective as well.
I would say like Navneeth said, whatever works personally for you. Could you repeat the question more specifically? Sorry.
They're specifically asking if there is any software or any thing like that that they need to use to prepare for the spelling bees.
Right. So yeah, it would definitely be individualized. For me, I did love the flexibility of Spell Pundit and NSF online testing platforms or the games, but sometimes I felt like that wouldn't stick for me. And by rewriting words and reading them and drawing them out physically, that was kind of the way that I was able to learn them. Finding out what works for you is the best way to get an exposure to what softwares or strategies work the best, because something that works for someone won't work for you as well. And I think what helped me too is kind of finding ways to learn spelling was outside my designated study time. So I had like a maybe like 12 to 5 period where I would like just be fully studying, and then outside of that I would do other things to give my mind a break. But in those times, doing things like maybe Googling a word or like listening to a podcast are also ways you can find strategies that allow you to expose yourself to words while you're not actively studying, and that will only build your habits of power. So kind of find out what works best for you. But I would recommend like looking at the Spell Pundit or like the NSF like game if that's something interesting to you too. But yeah.
Yeah, one other question. I think we'll just take 2 more questions. Desi, I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, we are already run out of time. But maybe we'll 2 more questions we can take. And
yeah, I think most of these questions are around the same thing.
okay.
I think one thing that's important, a lot of people ask, but that particular. So let me go to a different question. They're asking, where can I find good study materials for spelling bee? I think we have some links on our website. I will take that question, and I will share the link in the chat. And then also, when you send the email to the parents, you can.
Yeah, I will add it to that. Yeah.
And the spelling bee preparation links, and I think we have links to like everything that Navneeth and Sahana shared there. So you guys can look through that page. And then, so the last question, I'll take this one question, and then we will close the call.
Right.
Do you have any other tips to spell unknown, unstudied words? I'm not sure what is the difference between those 2 words in spelling bees.
Sure. So I guess I'll start that off. In terms of words you haven't seen before, you have to be very mindful of the information that you receive. You have to be strategic about what you ask, or alternatively, you can ask for all the information, but it's important that you process all of it. For example, there are some conventional tips. If a word ends with the S sound, knowing whether it's a noun or an adjective can tell you whether it's OUS or US. A pretty basic rule. Be used based off of the language of origin. That's generally the most helpful piece of information. Try to think of potential roots the word may have come from. That is specifically helpful for Latin and Greek words, but also sort of by extension to words from other Romance languages. So that is that's also helpful. Also, based off of the language that you get, trying to generalize that and think of patterns of other words that come from that language. That's also helpful. Asking alternate pronunciations is also helpful because many people forget to do this, but many times the alternate pronunciation can make the word significantly more phonetic and easier to spell as a function of that. So being strategic about what you ask can definitely give you the clues that you need to get the word. What I did for unknown words, if you're talking about words of unknown origin, there really isn't any systematic way of doing it, but I'm assuming you're talking about words that you haven't seen before. In that case, you have to be strategic about what you ask and use that information wisely. Try to make connections on stage with other words with similar information profiles. For example, if you get an Italian name, try to think of other Italian names. Or if you get a word that has a certain root, you're unsure about the schwa, try to think of other words with that root. Think of what the schwa is in those words. So you have to essentially make connections on stage to other similar words. And if it comes down to the wire, you're confused between 2 options. That's probably what makes you get the word correct. That's all that I have to say.
Thank you, guys. Anything, Sahana?
Yeah, so I would definitely suggest making sure you're familiar with language patterns, and not just like Romance languages, Latin and Greek, but also do a little bit or extensive looks into as many other languages like Slavic languages like Russian or Czech or Polish if you can, and Indic languages like, as Avani mentioned, Sanskrit, Hindi, Urdu, Persian. And by like learning a compilation of different languages, you'll be able to find that confirmation and being able to understand that certain languages have a specific feel and they look a different way than others. And then when you propose with an unknown word, you can kind of use that to your advantage and say, okay, I know that in these 3 languages, it's most likely this, or this language might be most likely this, and kind of build off on your gut feeling to go with the best option. There's no like set rules for words that don't have a like a defined origin, but you can use other languages to your advantage. If a word sounds Italian but isn't Italian, you can try using Italian language patterns. Do trust your gut and what you know, but also remember that it's usually 1 to 2 sounds that you need to focus on. Try to centralize on those specific sounds that you're tentative about, and always have a clear spelling in mind even if you think it's completely wrong, because it's better to have like a 90% chance than to completely blow your chance by saying something random. And yeah, I would definitely say learn from the consolidation of unknown words you study, look through those, notice patterns, and apply that in the future as well. Yeah.
And sorry, one last thing that I'd like to add. It's sort of an example that integrates some of the other concepts that we talked about in this session. So when I was competing in 2019, in like round 11 or 12 at finals, the word that I got was Bera. I hadn't seen it before. At that time, it wasn't in any published list, to my knowledge. So I was certainly confused when I heard the word because I hadn't encountered it before, or at least that form of the word before. But when I asked for the information, they said it came from a Mozambican geographical name. That sounds random at first glance. But something that you might have heard from the eponyms presentation is that it's a good idea to know where the countries that colonized other countries. So I happen to know that Portugal had conquered Mozambique at one point in time. And as a result, people in Mozambique, some of them speak Portuguese. So I was able to connect Beira, which is a Mozambican geographical name, with Portuguese patterns. That was sort of my last ditch effort. So in Portuguese, the A sound is often spelled EI. I made a connection to a word, mangabeira, that also had the EI spelling in a very similar profile as well. So I was able to connect a certain language pattern, a certain cluster that you see in Portuguese, with the fact that my word came from a place that was conquered by Portugal. So based off of that, I was able to figure out that the spelling was B-E-I-R-A. And I didn't know the word before, and I was able to guess it correctly. So that's an example that I like to cite a lot in the classes that I teach about how it's important to make these connections on stage, especially for words that you haven't encountered before. Because realistically speaking, there is always a very high chance that you'll encounter spellings or encounter words that you haven't seen before. And that goes from early levels on to even when you're at the level of being a finalist, or even aiming higher than that.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, especially Navneeth, Sahana, Harini, and also Avani, for all your enthusiasm in talking to the kids, younger peers for you. Thank you for your time, your effort, your preparedness, and the enthusiasm you showed in talking, and of course your patience with answering questions and all, and staying over time. And it's really one of the wonderful sessions I had seen. I also want to thank Narayan Jenga for helping us with all the questions and reading out all the nice one, and Dr. Krishnan Gauri for introducing us. Krishnan, I apologize. Somehow I was not able to promote you as this thing to answer the questions. Somehow it stuck with the panelists only. So, but anyway, thank you for all your time and efforts. Parents, please, thank you for staying back. And when you on your way out, please fill in the feedback form. And again, in 2 weeks, we are going to continue this same theme. On January 22nd, we are planning to have another session on computer science pros. We'll be sending the information soon, and then please register and join us, and then help us. And this is one of the new subjects we are introduced as a contest, so it will be really a useful session for all of you. Thank you very much. Please stay safe and healthy, and see you all right back here next time. Thank you, guys. Bye for now.
Thank you, Dr. Flanagan.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Really.
Bye, Navneeth.
Bye, Uncle.
Yeah, it's really great, guys.
Thank you.
I'll close it down.
Bye, Desi.
Thank you, Narayana. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.